We have already studied that in mammals, as soon as the ovulation occurs, the uterus prepares its endometrium for receiving the fertilized ovum. But if the fertilization does not take place, the endometrial lining is not required. In that case, there are two options. Endometrial lining is reabsorbed. This happens in estrous cycle. Another option is to shed off the endometrial lining. This is accompanied by bleeding and is known as menstrual cycle. As you already know, menstrual cycle is a feature of primates, while estrous cycle is a feature of non-primate mammals. In this lesson, we shall discuss the details of menstrual cycle and understand the hormonal changes associated with the reproductive or menstrual cycle in human females. Ovulation in human females occurs once every month, and the set of changes associated with ovulation are closely regulated by rise and fall in levels of various hormones. This leads to cyclical changes in uterus. These cyclical changes occurring in human uterus as a result of hormones involved in oogenesis form the menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is also known as uterine cycle because it involves changes in uterus. Before we go into the details of hormones and events, some key features of menstrual cycle. It occurs in primates, monkeys, apes, humans, etc. The menstrual cycle involves 28 to 29 day period. It is divided into three phases: the menstrual phase, the proliferative or the follicular phase, and the secretory phase. First menstruation starts at puberty and is known as menarche. After secretory phase, menstrual phase of next cycle starts. Now just focus on this diagram from your NCERT books. This is a graph that shows 4 events occurring simultaneously, and the progress of events has been marked as per the days of the menstrual cycle. The days have been marked on the x-axis. Day 1 is taken to be the day on which the menstrual phase begins. Right now we need to focus on the y-axis. On the left hand side of y-axis you see 4 labels. Starting from the top, the pituitary hormone levels, the ovarian events, the ovarian hormone levels, and the uterine events. We already know that events leading to ovulation are regulated by hormones, specifically the pituitary hormones, follicle stimulating hormone or FSH, and LH or the luteinizing hormone. The rise in level of these hormones leads to development of follicle from primary, secondary, tertiary, mature follicle, and finally the release of ovum. Ovary also releases certain hormones, that is the estrogen and the progesterone. These two hormones cause changes in the endometrium of uterus. So there are 4 events happening simultaneously, each dependent upon the other one and regulated by the other one. Let's see how these events are coordinated. Now the first of the 3 phases of menstrual cycle is the menstrual phase, which involves shedding of endometrial lining. This extends from day 1 to day 5. You must remember that biological events occur within a range, and so menstrual phase may be 3 to 5 days long. In some cases it may extend up to 7 days. This phase involves destruction and shedding of endometrial lining of uterus, which is then deposited into the lumen of uterus and then removed through vagina. The ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, are at very low level. Can you think why it is so? Approximately 30 to 50 ml of blood is lost during menstruation, and it occurs only if fertilization does not occur. Now, two very important things about the menstrual phase. First and foremost, menstruation occurs only if there is no fertilization. If the ovum gets fertilized, events related to pregnancy begin, and then there is no menstruation. But no menstruation does not always mean pregnancy. Lack of menstruation may also be due to stress or poor health and some other conditions. The other important thing about menstrual cycle, though not mentioned in your books, is dysmenorrhea or painful menstruation. This may be due to uterine inflammation, muscular contractions, or certain conditions in pelvic structures. Dysmenorrhea is a very common condition with up to 10 lakh cases in India. Its common symptoms include lower abdominal pain, back pain, diarrhea, nausea, headaches, dizziness, etc. During the second phase of menstrual cycle, two events occur simultaneously. The first event, the primary follicle in the ovary begins to develop. It passes through the stages of secondary and tertiary follicle, finally maturing into Graafian follicle. That is why this stage is known as the follicular phase. The second event occurs in the uterus. Here, the endometrial lining begins to thicken again. The epithelial cells divide or proliferate. Also, the blood vessels in this lining are thickened. That is, vascularization of endometrium occurs. Since here proliferation of endometrium occurs, this phase is also known as the proliferative phase. By the time this phase is over, the endometrium of uterus is several millimeters thick and ready to receive the fertilized ovum. Another effect of FSH is secretion of estrogen from the developing follicles in ovary. This estrogen stimulates and sustains the proliferative phase. Now let's see which hormones are responsible for phase 2. Let's go back to our graph. You can see that in follicular phase or the proliferative phase, both the pituitary hormone levels FSH and LH level rise. If you recall, LH and FSH stimulate follicle development and ovulation. In fact, around 14th day, there is a surge in level of both these hormones. This surge is known as LH surge. This LH surge stimulates ovulation. At this point, the Graafian follicle ruptures, releasing the ovum, and the corpus luteum is formed. So there are three hormones involved in follicular phase. Two are from pituitary. FSH, which controls follicular development and secretion of estrogen. LH, which controls ovulation and formation of corpus luteum. Then there is the ovarian hormone estrogen, which is secreted from the developing follicles inside the ovary, and it stimulates and sustains the phase 2. The third and last phase of menstrual cycle is known as the luteal or the secretory phase. It occurs after ovulation. Ovulation has been mentioned in your books as ovulatory phase, but do not confuse it as an additional phase of menstrual cycle. It is an event occurring in the previous phase, that is follicular phase. You can see here that the levels of LH and FSH decline in this phase. So the events occurring in this phase are due to high levels of two ovarian hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone. Now try to recall which parts of ovary secrete these two hormones. Progesterone helps in maintenance of endometrial lining. Till the time corpus luteum is there, progesterone is released. You can see that the secretion of progesterone begins to decline after around 10 days of ovulation, that is around the 25th day. This is if there is no fertilization. The corpus luteum degenerates and the endometrial lining begins to be disorganized, leading back to the menstrual phase. Another activity occurring during this phase is enlargement of endometrial glands, leading to high levels of secretion from them. That is why this phase is also known as the secretory phase. Now, if the endometrial lining is degraded, what is the point of preparing it? Endometrial lining serves to implant the developing embryo and helps in the development of this embryo during pregnancy. So during pregnancy, all events of menstrual cycle stop. What happens to corpus luteum? It is sustained for another 3 months and continues to secrete the progesterone. If it degrades, endometrium would not remain intact and pregnancy would fail. What happens after 3 months? By then, placenta and placental hormones take over, but that is a topic for next session. Before we end, one more term related to menstrual cycle, that is menopause. Menopause is defined as time when ovulation and menstruation cease. It typically occurs at age 45 to 55. But in the years preceding it, the regularity of the ovarian and menstrual cycles gradually fades. Menopause is accompanied by a sharp rise in production of GnRH, FSH and LH. But the concentration of estrogen declines. Since the concentration of estrogen declines, it leads to reduction in the size of uterus and some additional effects such as development of osteoporosis, a variety of cardiovascular and neural effects including anxiety and depression. With this, we come to the end of this very important session. Here are a few questions for you to practice. Thank you and have a very nice day.